Thank you, Nick. For the sake of time, I'm just going to briefly review the major sellers into the auction and how they performed in 2008. First, the big picture, the total number of vehicles sold at auction. Now, this number will refer to our trade association, the National Auto Auction Association, and they're represented here today by both their president, Bob McConkey, and the executive director, Frank Hackett. But in terms of the press deadlines for this book, I have to come up with an estimate every year. Usually I've been pretty close. I think I'm going to be a little bit further off this year simply because of the volatility of the market. But in any event, my estimate was 9.24 million vehicles sold, representing a decline of 3% from 2007. That is slightly less, but not a lot less, than what we anticipated at this conference last year. And as you might expect, the biggest shortfall was in dealer consignment. According to my estimate, dealer consignment accounted for 46.4% of auction sales last year, whereas in the previous 3 years, they were over 50%. And there's an obvious reason for that, which I'll go through at the very end. First, just briefly review the commercial consigners into auction and what those trends were. Rental, the total number of new vehicles sold into rental last year declined 21%. 1,503,000 and some change. No one is expecting for this number to rebound any time soon. The rental industry is weak in terms of demand, but more importantly, they do not need to buy as many new vehicles every year in order to maintain the same fleet size. And that's because of this, as we all know, there's been a tremendous shift from program to risk units. As a matter of fact, the number of new vehicles sold as program cars has declined by over 50% in just the past 2 years. Since the typical risk car stays in service a considerably long period of time, the rental car companies can maintain their fleet size with fewer new vehicle purchases. And of course, last year they actually reduced their average fleet size, and I would expect their average fleet size would continue to fall this year, again, simply because rental demand is pretty weak. On to leasing. The number of vehicles leased, the lease penetration rate declined last year. Most of that decline coming in the fourth quarter. You couple that decline in the penetration rate with an 18% decline in new vehicle sales, and the actual number of new lease originations fell below 2 million units last year, lowest level in more than a decade. From the remarketing standpoint, of course, we see a delayed effect of that. The off-lease volumes are still going up, probably be up by 125,000 units this year, but then they start to fall off very significantly in 2011 and 2012. And as a matter of fact, the percentage decline in off-lease volumes this cycle is going to be just as big as it was in the previous cycle from 1999 down to 2006. But I would say there's a very big difference about this cycle. The last time we had that reduction in leasing in terms of the lease penetration rate, we still had very high new vehicle sales every year, averaged about 16.5 million units every year. This year we have a reduction in leasing. We also have a reduction in new vehicle sales, 13.2 million units last year. A lot of people are expecting sales this year to be south of 11 million units. So, you know, you can pretty much write in stone, you get out 2011, 2012, and dealers are going to be complaining about a lack of availability of good and 3- or 4-year-old cars, simply because they're not being produced today. We go to repossessions. Repossession volumes last year were a record 1.67 million units. It was up 12% from 2007, and the 2007 number was up 8% from 2006. I would expect the number would continue to increase this year. All of that will fall in the first half of the year. By the time we get to the back half of 2009, because originations have slowed so much and because of tighter lending standards, you can pretty well expect that repo volumes will be down in the second half of 2009. On the commercial fleet side of the business, the non-rental fleet, again, we had a decline last year, which was primarily concentrated in the fourth quarter. It was a decline of 13%. 872,000 units, according to Bobbitt's numbers. There'll be a further decline this year. I mean, this is driven by corporate profits and employee counts, and both of them are down. But, like leasing, it doesn't affect the remarketing industry until those out years. The end-of-service fleet volumes will continue to grow this year. And finally, the most important segment of the auction business, of course, is dealer consignment. And we did have a big drop last year, about 11%, I think, in terms of the industry volumes of dealer consign. And this basically explains why, as you all know, we had a big decline in new vehicle sales, 18%. A further decline is expected this year. So we're going to show an even larger peak-to-trough swing than we've seen in previous cycles. And we had this downward movement come with a lot of rapidity. In terms of used vehicle retail sales, again, this is a market which historically is very, very stable. The C&W numbers, now these include transactions by franchise dealers, independents, and private parties. Their numbers showed a decline of 12% last year in terms of used vehicle retail sales. That's pretty much unprecedented. The auto count Experian numbers show a decline of about 10%. So the reason I was leading up to this is to basically say the reason we had the reduction in dealer consignment was because of the slowdown in retail activity. Dealers get consignment vehicles, the vehicles they have to wholesale because they're trade-ins that they didn't want. Or you just have basically activity in the market. By my calculations, and these are hard numbers to come to, but by my calculations, if you take the number of vehicles last year that dealers had to wholesale, auctions got a bigger percentage of that than they did the prior year. And that was the same case in 2006 and 2007. Now, before I open it up to questions, I just want to make one comment on intelligent remarketing. This is a sort of a tagline which we used in the used car market report for the past 4 years, and of course it means different things to different people. Succinctly to me, it means that, you know, if you as a remarketer or any aspect within the chain of buyers and sellers, if you have a good understanding of the big, broad market forces and you apply statistical analysis to a robust database, you're going to improve your remarketing results. Well, you know, those big market forces, that's sort of my area. But I stand in envy of the analysts who work for Lynn Morgan and Manheim Consulting because they have the ability to apply the statistical analysis to really understand what's going on with the data. And I gave a couple indications there of those types of analysis which occur. And I would say, you know, these are statistically sophisticated processes. These are not easy things to do, to tweak out the individual factors when a lot of things are driving movements in prices. And then at the end, I said what intelligent remarketing is not the use of simple averages. You know, as somewhat of an analyst or a wannabe analyst, I get disappointed when I see people using simple averages and coming up with the wrong results. And it's not the drunkard's lamppost. That's an expression which, you know, kind of clever, so it has a lot of purported authors. Us economists attribute that saying to Henry George. He was a middle 19th century economist, and more importantly to you all, he was also a journalist, so he knew how to use words. And he was perturbed about the way the economic profession was going at that time, and he wrote, I'm afraid today that economists are using statistics like a drunkard used a lamppost, more for support than illumination. So before I throw it back the floor open to you, as I always say, I really enjoy this press conference every year because I like to, you know, hear what's going on in your minds. It also means that the used car market report is done. And also for me, it's a gathering of old friends because, as some of you know, that I started my career with NADA back in October of 1973. That was 1 week before the first Arab oil embargo. And I mention that not to accentuate my age, but to point out this observation. I truly believe that 2008 and 2009 combined will probably represent the toughest economic environment that the franchise dealers have ever operated in. And I think you heard from the comments from Dean, Sue, and Nick today that we're not only cognizant of these challenges, we are actually working on solutions to help dealers succeed. And with that, I throw the floor open to you all. Thank you.